Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Aaron from Exists Anew, starting off another podcast here with my good buddy Bo DeCourcy here in the famous Exists Anew studios.
Yeah, thanks for being so kind.
Yeah,
I never thought you would call me your buddy.
Yeah, well, it is somewhat flattering, I guess, to earn that right to be called my buddy. But
it means a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're here for a reason, not for this ridiculous banter.
Yeah. So, oftentimes we get some really interesting comments and mail to our email from readers of Exists Anew. And sometimes they're so good that we really want to stop and, whether we agree with them or not, but we really want to take the time to talk them through, because we think that if we've been thinking about it and other people have been thinking about it, it's really worth talking about, because who knows how many people are actually out there wondering the same things that we are. And we got a really interesting email. We're not going to read the whole thing. We'll come back to different points of it at different times through this podcast. But we got an email from our buddy Frank, who's been a loyal follower and commenter and contributor to the site through questions and emails. And we just want to say that we really appreciate that. Anybody who takes the time to kind of stimulate conversation, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, and I'll just interject really quickly and say that anytime you have a question or you want to throw something by us, or you think we're missing something, definitely send us an email. It's existsanew@gmail.com. And we do read that actually all the time. Yeah. So we really enjoy it, because we like to hear what other people's interpretations of what we're either writing or what we're talking about, or something that they're reading from a different source. So please send those our way anytime. And we do read them. Also on the Facebook page too. There's sometimes a lot of good comments going on there. So
yeah, we prefer to engage in dialogue rather than necessarily any type of conflictual discussion with people, because we think that more comes out of a dialogue. Right. So we really like to get stuff that, we might not necessarily agree with it, but we're really open to questioning, and we're not kind of one of our philosophies is to not be, incredibly, held down to one point of view or one way of thinking, to be open-minded.
Right. Yeah, don't spend too much time fighting everybody else's ideas, because then you don't have any time to develop your own. I think that's important too. You ever notice that? A lot of people literally, sometimes you'll see their work stagnate because they're too busy defending their own points. And then, like I've written about before, they just become an ass and they pick and choose and try to prove themselves right, rather than actually developing what started that thought process in the first place.
It's hard to do that. I mean, I admit, because the quote I, is getting bigger with social media. So you had, authors in the past, you hear these stories about, they went out into the woods, Thoreau, or you hear people talk about like locking themselves in this special area where they go to write and think and be creative. And, they could just write and write and write, and then they release this one big lump sum of writing material. Nowadays, we're always worried about we got to say something on Facebook and Twitter, and what are people going to think about it? Who's going to like it? And even like posts, I can imagine, we feel this way, so I can imagine other people feel this way. You write a post, and it's like almost immediately you have to process what type of feedback it creates.
Yeah, there's almost a constant interaction. Interaction is important for growth and for evolution. But if you have too much interaction, like I said before, it stunts that growth. And in fact, what you end up doing is, rather than evaluating ideas, you just shut them off and you just turn them down, and you just say, this happens with me all the time when I develop an idea, when I want to write about something. And then I'll read what I started writing the day before and go no, I can't write that. I can't. I just stop. Yeah. You just stop, because you have this, like you said, you're viewing yourself from this alter ego, and you're saying, the id, the ego, and the superego, whatever. You're viewing yourself from this other point of view because of these interactions you've had throughout the day, and you think, well, who am I to put that out? And a lot of times we censor ourselves, and when we censor ourselves, we're not being free. Yeah, we're being constrained. Our thoughts are becoming constrained because we're worried about what other people are thinking about certain things. But that freedom of thought is hard to do, to actually let your mind wander and develop an idea without worrying about censoring it for the consumption of others is very difficult. And anytime, even sitting in front of a microphone, it becomes difficult to talk. And I say this to people all the time about the podcast. It's like, Aaron and I talk much better together when we don't have these microphones. I almost don't like listening to ourselves when we play it back.
I know.
Because it literally, we're at about 40% when you put a microphone in front of us, because
it's terrible.
We understand that other people are listening, so we censor ourselves in a good way sometimes, but it also becomes almost to a fault.
Yeah. It's the same way even when you write, like the thought of anybody reading, like when you actually visualize anybody actually reading what you're writing, it becomes much more difficult. It's like you have to write for no audience, just yourself. And then you put it out there and hopefully it jives with someone, but it's a very difficult process.
And that's what people respond to, too.
Yeah, totally.
People respond to, people that really care respond to actual thought, that something that they haven't thought about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this little...
Anyway, segue time.
Yeah, well, this little introduction is good because it kind of ties into what we often talk about, looking at our ancestral past and how people used to live versus modern times. Because, our philosophy is if you look around right now and within our own lives, there's clearly something's wrong with our health, with our lifestyles in general. So if you look to our ancestral past, how did they live? We like to talk about, meshing these two and really understanding like how a human being not is supposed to live, but how can we live best given the knowledge we have of our ancestors and currently. So we got an email from one of our readers, as I said, Frank, recently, that kind of ties into this concept of, are we better off now, particularly following the agricultural revolution, which took place roughly 10,000 years ago, versus back when we were primarily just a tribal species, hunter-gatherers? Are we better off? So Bo and I kind of talk about this. So this email led into some of this discussion. So I'm going to read pieces of it and we'll come back to different pieces. But so, Frank says here, in a nutshell, there's much to be said about the benefits of eating paleo. And he uses these ideals himself. But we would never have this knowledge or access to another point of view or reference without a sedentary farming-based culture. Various technologies and many of the sciences and arts would be stunted in comparison to us now, or would have a different flavor about them if not for a history of settled communities of thinkers and tinkerers and experimenters. Of course, some of these discoveries and experiments are discovered while out in nature, but they are usually best analyzed while in a settled and stable, mundane environment. So Frank goes on to say more here, but we just want to kind of, I guess, start with this point here. Does agriculture allow us to have the time to think and sort of analyze and become a better, more evolved species? Or has agriculture just sort of created a ton of problems that we now have to think about and analyze?
Right.
So at some point, did we stop evolving? Did agriculture, did it maybe initially it gave us a little bit more leisure time hypothetically to sort of think more and develop our ideas, but at some point it certainly hit a threshold where we are much more enslaved, I think anyway, and I think you do too, to what we've created through agriculture.
Yeah. So before we get into that, I just want to cover a few things. So people say, well, we don't really know what a hunter-gatherer lifestyle looked like because that was so long ago. Well, that's not true. We know a lot. And there are also still some indigenous cultures living today. So we can look at their model.
Yes.
And in fact, a lot of, anthropology has shown that they do live very happy lives. Now, happy is a context, and people have to understand this, because just because we can't fathom being without MacBooks and iPhones and cars, that the thought of that scares us, right? That's the apocalypse. If we didn't have cars, electricity, computers, iPhones, the internet, that's the apocalypse.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, technically there are people already living in the apocalypse, right? But they're happy. They're in a happy apocalypse because they're indigenous cultures. So let's first, I'm going to ask if you can think of it that way first and say, recognize that if you do trust in the science, right, the anthropology, that the people that have studied these indigenous cultures for hundreds of years now, and it's well documented, even today it's going on, that there are these cultures out there that are a couple of different things that we don't have. One, they live in equilibrium with their environment.
Yes.
2, they live without the need of technological advances as we know them, electricity.
Yes.
Right? And 3, they're eating and moving almost exactly the same way as they have for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those are 3 things that are completely different from what we are dealing with.
Yes.
So let's take that for example. We have 2 completely different cultures, and both contain happiness. Okay, so let's recognize that first, and then we go back to what Aaron was saying. Could Aaron and I be sitting here having these thoughts if we had to hunt and gather our own food?
Yeah.
Right? So that's a very good question.
Yeah, and Frank brings that up, and it's tough to say because, certainly we wouldn't be sitting here having the same conversation with a MacBook in our presence and talking on these microphones.
The internet, yeah.
Right. Now, the first thing I would ask is, would that be a bad thing? Okay? Mm-hmm. Because you and I have talked before, and, being a relative city person, when I go into nature, and even things that I've done with you, whether it be hiking, camping, whatever, staring at the stars, that's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it depends on the context in which you're talking, like to get back to what you were saying before, what's better? So in other words, would it be a bad thing if we didn't have this MacBook sitting in front of us? Right. If we were amidst the cosmos and fully involved in it?
Right.
The other thing is who's to say that there wouldn't still be technological advances with a hunter-gatherer society?
Exactly.
It's really tough to say because it's really tough to say how they would have evolved and what they would have developed into.
I'll just go into a really rudimentary example of this. So this upcoming week, we're going on our camping trip.
Yeah.
And we're calling it the Exist Anew Retreat 2013, right? So here's the thing. A lot of the idea of camping, like remote camping, I'm not talking about, back your trailer up, plug it in, hook it up to the water, blast the radio, and open up the cooler. I'm talking about remote camping. I'm talking you carry everything in on your back, including your food, things that to make fire, nobody around. Mm-hmm. Like we're going to be in a position where we're miles away,
right, from
cell phone service,
right.
No, literally, the closest we'll have a what you might call a road. That's probably about a mile away, and
mm-hmm.
then from there, the next step up is an actual dirt road, which is another mile away, and then from there it's 4 miles to an actual tar, and then to an actual highway, it's another 20 miles. So
it's out there.
Anyway, we're out there. So camping, okay? Camping can be very, very enjoyable if you're good at it. Okay? You take somebody. Aaron and I are basically. I'm the country boy. He's the city boy, right?
Pretty much.
So I grew up camping, remote camping. We've gone remote camping since I was a baby. There are pictures of me remote camping when I was literally a toddler, right? So I have developed these skills that I don't even notice that I have. And I'm not saying I'm Bear Grylls out here, right? I'm not saying that. But I'm saying the ability to actually be completely comfortable in a remote setting for weeks at a time. Mm-hmm. That is the apocalypse to somebody.
Yeah.
So these technologies that we're talking about, just the ability to make a fire on demand, the ability to preserve food and to make food and other methods over the fire, mm-hmm. To actually realize, to see the beauty in things because you're relaxed enough to see that.
Yeah.
So I think the question comes down to, do you have the necessary technology, right? Do you have the necessary technology that leads to leisure time to think? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily require your food being supplied to you and your work being done for you. Because if we look at it, it doesn't take that much to have leisure time. And like you said, I think if you with just enough, who knows? Who knows what that is? But camping, as a very small example, can either be a nightmare or a dream. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's oftentimes, like modern people, we fall into that trap of man, how could we ever live like that? That would have been terrible. They were so primitive, and I can't even imagine. But of course, hunter-gatherers didn't know anything else. And I'd imagine that if you talk to many modern, especially hunter-gatherers, that look at how we live, they'd be like, what are you doing? Wait, so you're going and sitting in this office for 40 to 50 hours a week, and then you're coming home and you're staring at this screen, and you're alienated from your family? Wait, your family lives in different parts all over the country, and you never see them? What? Your tribe is dispersed? They'd be like, what are you doing? That sounds like such a horrible, horrible life. So that's why we always talk about the ancestral context, because I think it's really important. So that in and of itself is important to know, because who knows what's really better? Because as you said, if you can be comfortable being out in the camping and in the woods, then that's...
And yes, I get it. That's only a couple weeks, right?
Right.
Now, winter comes along, it's a different story. Right? I've done some winter camping. It's a different story.
Right.
And I'll tell you right now, living in the north and camping in the winter, it's an acquired taste.
Oh, sure.
You really have to be comfortable with being cold.
Right.
And
hence migrating. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
people didn't necessarily stay in the harshest of places and conditions. You'd move.
They're like, wait a minute, you're going to stay here all winter? You're not going to pack up and go south?
This is terrible.
Which we do. A lot of people do these days. They actually do. They follow the sun, which is great.
Yeah. And another thing that Frank got into that I think is valid, because we talk about this a lot. Look at some of the human achievements that has come out of our struggle. I mean, there's a lot of people living in this world, and we just don't have enough resources for everybody to be healthy and happy. So if you look at, I don't know, even the last few thousand years, a lot of people have really gone through some horrible things. I'm
going to play devil's advocate with you on the point that you brought up before. These are achievements over a pain that we've created, though. Right. What we consider achievements are answers to problems that we've created.
Sure.
Right? Problems that wouldn't have existed before. So is there a point, and this is what I was getting at, is there a point when enough is enough? And I'll bring it back to the equilibrium, right? So you have these indigenous cultures that have developed an equilibrium with their environment. They have just the right amount of technology that they need to create the leisure time. And technically that technological progression seems to, I don't want to say stagnate or stop, but there's just no need for more.
Yeah.
They say, why would we need any more? You know what I mean? So
see, I don't know that. You know what I mean? Like, isn't creativity just an inherent characteristic of man? Right. You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't they have always wanted to create something? I mean, I'm literally posing it as a question. I don't know for sure.
Absolutely. And what I'm getting at is the creativity, once you fulfill that need, it transfers to a different area. Like it occupies a different thought process. Yeah. Once they say, hey, we have great shelter, we have a great food source, we have all the leisure time we need, the mind wanders off into something else. And that's when you start contemplating and you start staring at the sky and you start... I think this is where spirituality came into the whole place. And I'm not bringing religion into this, but I'm talking about spirituality, a deeper meaning. And I think this is where, people kind of transcend to a different level of being. We go beyond animals to something else. Right. And that's where the mind is set to go free.
And where you are here, I think this is what Frank is asking, though, is did agriculture, the ability for us to have food ready at hand rather than going out to hunt and gather it, did it allow us to access those creative developments easier? I really think that's, essentially what he's asking.
Exactly. And exactly. Yes and no, right? Because once again, it's not like you're saying, "Oh, I just killed a deer. I'm gonna have to kill another deer tomorrow." That's not. That's not how it works. If you study these indigenous cultures, they actually have ways of storing food and prepare. There's no shortage of food unless there's a famine, which agricultures also have too, right? That's been well documented. And in fact, there are people starving as we speak, but they're surrounded by food.
Yeah.
Okay, so agriculture does not free you of that. Okay, people still go hungry, even in agriculture. Okay, it's probably less likely you go hungry in a well-established indigenous culture because it's more egalitarian. Everybody shares. Okay, so essentially, Yes, it can. It can give you plenty of extra time to think about this stuff if you are in the right position to do so.
Exactly. That's what I wrote back to Frank.
Exactly. If you're in the right position to do so.
It depends who you ask.
Exactly. So it can happen in both places.
Yes.
The question is that we're arguing here is which is better.
Yeah.
Okay. While agriculture has created plenty of leisure time for some people, it has also robbed it from most people. If you look at it, it's robbed it from most people, right?
It's been horribly devastating to many people.
And a compounding factor to that is most people don't even think about that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Because now we are surrounded by distractions, right? So it's overkill. I think we've hit a mode where we're overkill, where we have so much, some of us have so much leisure time, we don't know what to do with ourselves. So we surround ourselves with these gadgets, right? And this technology, and we just infinitely distract ourselves. And I actually see this distraction as a plague because it's overkill to the point where we've stopped evolving our thought process because that actually requires some work. It requires some quiet time, almost necessary quiet time. That when you're sitting down and going, wow, I got nothing to do but stare off into space, and that's when your brain wanders, and that's where you receive that
so it's hit a threshold in an agricultural world where you're not going to see, or much less anyway, see fantastic works of art because you're having more emulators. Emulators and people that are just being completely turned off by their lifestyles, by being plugged into electronic devices.
Removed from any type of struggle that requires it stimulates growth. Now, there are some people that are completely and totally insulated from almost nearly every threat. If you have the right type of medical care, if you have enough in your bank account, and you have, pretty much that's all you need, then you are insulated from almost every struggle and every threat that you need. So you are in a constant state of almost atrophy, it seems. And I'm not saying, we should all be out there running from lions and starving ourselves. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, I think the human brain requires a certain amount of temperament, right? That's why I enjoy getting out there in the winter and climbing in the winter, because you get exposed to these incredible extremes. And when you control your environment so well that the temperature never changes on you, maybe it does from the car to the house, right? You never go without food. You never go without stimulation. You stagnate. And when you control that, that chaos is necessary. It's that fractal pattern. It's that fractal pattern, like your heartbeat. That's the signal to life. And we write about this a lot.
In a fractal pattern, there is resolution. At some point. What we're talking about now, one of the issues is that there's just a constant sort of, for the average, American person like me, there's a constant sort of mid-level struggle that never resolves itself. And what you're talking about with a fractal pattern is there's struggle and resolution. You actually, there's somewhat of a way out.
And unfortunately, it's a self-created struggle, and we don't realize that. But we are choosing these roles that we go into. And up until probably about 10 years ago, you had the choice still. Maybe 20 years ago, you had the choice still to kind of just walk away from it, go off the grid.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring that up in a second. When we became...
He's getting excited now. He's going to rob that. He's going to destroy that mic.
But when we became dependent upon agriculture, we immediately became a people who could be enslaved. If you can walk into...
Enslaved by our weakness.
But if you can walk into any environment and obtain your own food and your own shelter and your own means to survive, you're much, much, much less able to be enslaved. I'm not saying that it never happened in hunter-gatherer societies or anything like that, but in general... it's much harder to control a person that has that type of freedom. As soon as you can't secure your own food, you can't build your own shelter, you can't supply your life's needs, and anybody can do anything to you. Look at 7 billion children. Look at us sitting here. What are we going to do tomorrow if the grid goes out? if the electricity stops and we can't get our food and our water and drive.
It's the apocalypse.
Right. It is the apocalypse.
But to somebody else,
exactly,
it's everyday life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's some people who are like, this is cool. I'm just going to keep getting my food out in the woods and hunt and gather, and I'm good. I'm not living any different. So that's the real contrast. And getting back to Frank's question about, and the question that we pose is, are we better now as opposed to before the agricultural revolution? I mean, I think when you look at some of these things, I think that the mass majority of us are in a much worse position now because of that, because of our dependence.
So going forward, and you guys are going, well, you guys are crazy. Guess what? You can't go back. We said it. We've been saying that forever. We can't go back. No. So what is this whole Exist New thing all about? It's recognizing the position that we are in today and saying, look, we can still restore ourselves to the freedom that we deserve.
Right.
Through honoring and understanding the ancestral context. Yeah. And at the same time, learning to say, all right, if I learn to navigate through this Neolithic, navigating the Neolithic is essentially a term that we've always kind of thrown around. If I learn to navigate through this, reduce my dependency on the grid, increase my nutritional freedom, right, and my economic freedom, then I can actually regain some of those freedoms that I traded in for safety. Yeah. Right. And I think that Ben Franklin quote. No, was that Ben Franklin? Yeah, Ben Franklin.
I don't know.
Who was
I don't know
that?
what the quote is yet.
Anyone who's willing to, sacrifice a little bit of freedom for safety deserves neither. Mm-hmm. Right. That's a little extreme, but that makes sense because that's what we're doing every day. Every day that we decide to continue to emulate an existence and enslave ourselves. And these are it sounds pretty dramatic. I get it. But essentially, if you really think about it, every day that we wake up and we choose to continue down that path, to stay reliant or even increase our reliance on the grid, whether it's fostering our declining health because we refuse to recognize that most of the foods that are given to us will actually degenerate our bodies and our minds, right?
Yep.
Moving in ways that, or not moving at all.
Exactly, yeah.
So every day that we get up and do that, we're trading in a little bit of our freedom each day for a little bit more safety.
Yep.
Right? And there comes a point.
Perceived safety.
Perceived safety, yeah. And to a degree, real safety. I mean, if you say, hey, if I keep contributing to this health plan, if I keep contributing to my 401k and I keep this job, my retirement plan, then I'll be okay down the road. Mm-hmm. But it never ends. And that's what people have to recognize. People have this grand idea that someday, I'll be free of all this. Yeah. Someday I'll have the money to buy myself this freedom. And you see that meme going around on the internet a lot. Yeah. And it's the only one that I kind of really like, because it does make sense. Yeah. That someday they think it will end. Most people will only continue to deteriorate. Yes. Right? You will only get older. You will only get more decrepit. Mm-hmm. And more dependent. And you're trading in the best years of your life, health-wise, for a future time that may never come. Yep. And if it does, by that time, you won't even recognize it. There'll be a serious decline in your physical and mental health, probably. So, back to what I was saying is, what are we talking about? We're saying we recognize we can't go back. We recognize that there is this ancestral context and this wisdom that we have to learn from our ancestors, which people would call primitives. But we also recognize that, hey, there was some sort of evolution, and you can either use some of this technology to enslave you, or you can use it to free you in a certain way. And it's a powerful tool that can do great harm or can do great good. Yeah. And that's the reality. There is no going back. We can sit here and argue all day, all night. Mm-hmm. Would it be better if this had never happened? If this revolution never happened? We'll never know. Yeah. But what we do know is a lot of times the hybrid is the best choice. Yeah. Right? Well, it's really the only choice now. And I think you just touched upon something here where humans made a choice roughly 10,000 years ago, and we went all in. Yeah. We went to agriculture, and we started
populating without limit.
Yeah.
So we went all in on a certain lifestyle. And the thing is, at the time, we didn't really know what it would turn out to be. But now here in 2013, we're starting to see, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. You see it all the time where humans do this and they just jump right into it. But then later on, in hindsight, they're like, oh, man, that wasn't a good idea. But you don't find out till later. And I think that that's where we're getting now, where people are starting to say, wait a second, they made a choice then, and now we're starting to really pay for it now. And it's looking like maybe that wasn't a good choice. So, even if we could go back, maybe we should go back if we could, if by some fantasy law we could actually go back,
The funny thing is, as what most people are kind of pointing to, we may force ourselves back with some sort of weird apocalypse.
Right. But in the meantime, considering what you said, that we can't go back, all we can really do is consider that sort of hybrid life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To honor our ancestral pasts and our needs for health, along with some of the marvels of technology that we have today, and do our best, because no one knows what's going to happen here.
And I can tell you right now, if you think the best bet for you to do is to stockpile MREs and guns and ammo, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think that's going to cut it. I think there's better ways to look. Everybody do what they want, because I'm all about freedom.
Yeah.
But I think there are better ways to spend your time and money than to owning more than one gun, right? And stockpiling MREs and resources that will end.
Yeah.
And then now you're in an even worse position. So what we like to do is, even without an apocalypse, just imagine how greatly you can increase your freedom if you have the choice to just completely walk away, even from a system that continues to go on, right? If just to have the choice to leave the grid, just the option, the ability, the capacity to say, see those woods? Give me a little time, a few tools, and I'm good.
Yeah.
And obviously, most people wouldn't ever make that choice.
Yeah, and I'm nowhere near that.
No, neither am I. Absolutely not.
Not even
but
remotely.
Imagine if you were closer to that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that you knew, imagine the weight that would come off your shoulders if you understood wild foods, wild medicinals, wild technology, essentially. So that if you ever wanted to, you could just walk away.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I know you know this, I don't know if anybody can ever really, at this point, truly just walk away. But you certainly greatly reduce your independence upon what everybody else is depending upon, grocery stores for food and everything else. And even if there's never going to be a time in your lifetime where you're like, oh, I really have to rely on wild food because the apocalypse is happening, it's a pretty amazing experience right here, even in the future. I mean, in the present.
Well, you were right. Yeah. You were right and wrong at the same time.
Harvesting wild foods is something that I never, ever, ever thought I would do. And there's a lot of people like, oh, you're a wild foodist now and some things like that. And it's like, no, like I'm a complete amateur trying to chip away and create a little bit of a base of knowledge around what I can actually eat in the woods. But the cool thing is, it's not like I'm preparing for some apocalyptic scenario when I'm doing it. It's actually really fun to do it here in the present, and it's really healthy. Like you can get foods that have more nutritional density than anything you're going to find anywhere. It's amazing, and with more medicinal properties.
Yeah, I think there's a shift in your mindset too that comes about when you start to gain this knowledge. And a lot of people say, look, I want to know where I came from. I want to know who my grandfather was. Or people that don't know their fathers, they want to find out who their father was. Mm-hmm. And I think you get that same kind of feeling when you say, look, I just want to know what this human animal is, because I feel completely removed from it at this time. I feel like I'm literally wrapped in plastic. I'm walking around wrapped in plastic and metal and rubber. I want to know what it feels like to know what my ancestors and those beings were like when they were what it was like when they actually interacted directly with nature. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of that same feeling. It's an ancestry is what it is.
It is. And we've talked about this. I mean, everybody has a story about their parents, how, oh, my dad taught me this, my mom taught me that. I've always thought about this because, a relative, et cetera, taught me about this. And those are very important. And what I think we forget is there was literally a way of life, how to live, that was passed on through successive generations. So in other words, we didn't need to sit here as modern humans and say, what the heck is this all about? What are we supposed to do with this scenario?
What's going on?
Yeah, how can we figure this out? How can we think about it and study it through science and research and figure out all these issues that we've created? Because we actually had a formula that was just passed on and on and on and on, and we knew what to eat, we knew how to live, because it had worked for millions of years.
Yep.
And I think that,
well, yeah. Go on.
When you go and you learn about when you learn about wild foods or how to build a shelter or how ancestral people lived, you tap into that wisdom, that knowledge that had existed for millions of years. And that's pretty interesting because we're totally
that had
cut
evolved
off
over millions of years.
That
hundreds of thousands of years, essentially, as we know it.
Right.
But yeah, certainly, and we're not going to go on too much longer with this because we like to keep these short, and we don't. It's easy for us to digress into a rant.
Yeah.
A diatribe, rather than a dialogue.
Right.
But certainly, all we're asking is that people really consider that there is the possibility to live an extraordinary existence without any modern technology at all, because it's being done as we speak, and it's been done, like Aaron said, for hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whenever you go down that road with technology, while you solve some problems, you create some. Mm-hmm. And I think that's becoming more and more clear as we go on, that we're chaining ourselves to these technologies. What becomes, a privilege and becomes, an interesting toy can soon become a crutch very quickly. Yep. And people are noticing this. Cell phones are the perfect example. I still remember the day when I didn't have a cell phone, and breaking down was a scary situation.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people growing up today have never felt that.
Yeah.
And it's now, a cell phone is now no longer a privilege. It's a crutch to a lot of people. So recognize that as we advance, we are creating crutches.
Yes.
Out of our privileges.
Right. And I think that these are some of the questions that we want to leave people with is, are we going further and further into a state of dependency that is going to be completely devastating to our lives on, going forward here? And then also the larger question that we started the podcast with kind of is, did hunter-gatherers live much worse lives? Do we live much better lives now? Is the answer somewhere in between? We kind of invite people to think about that because that's what we're thinking about too. And we really encourage people to respond, comment on Facebook or send us emails. We love to get emails. We love to respond and talk to people. And we're also going to be putting together some small retreats and then also just kind of like conversational opportunities. We get a small group of people together and pick subjects and talk about them. So let us know if you're interested for sure.
And also, we're throwing around the idea of doing a weekly live Ustream show to get some people involved. Maybe even like a number you can call in. Obviously, some sort of chat, questions, discussions. I'm sure people are going to write some pretty funny stuff. So
totally.
We're ready for that.
Especially some of our friends.
Please recognize that we don't take ourselves too seriously.
Nope, certainly not.
Ever.
Nope.
Trust me. If you heard some of our private conversations, you'd probably laugh. But
they'd laugh, or they might cry, or call the police. Maybe even probably some of them.
We just put these out there. You're either going to read what we write or listen to what we talk about, and that's fine. And some people it resonates with. Some people may roll their eyes. That's cool. We understand. That's great. Actually, we prefer that.
Yeah.
Because if everybody's into it, then we're obviously emulating.
Yes, exactly.
So let's stop rambling.
Yeah. It's cool. Everybody check us out at existsanew.com and check out our Facebook page as well. We appreciate your support, and we hope to talk soon.
Yeah. Upcoming podcast, too, with an interesting guest. I'm just going to throw that out there last second.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be chatting with a philosophy professor from the University of Southern Maine named Jason Reed, and we'll give you more details soon. He is an author. Yeah. Really interesting guy. We're really excited to have him on. It's going to be a really cool conversation, I'm sure.
And if you know anybody that you'd like to hear about or you think would be interested in talking with us, please send it to our email address, existsnew@gmail.com.
Yep.
And that's it. We'll talk to you guys later.
All right. See you.